Hey everybody. In the past couple drop videos, I have talked about bags. Bag faces, saddlebag faces particularly. And as I've mentioned in those videos, bags are an entire vector of the rug and collecting world of weavings. And so I thought it would be kind of interesting, while I talk about them in those videos, I think we could do a more interesting type of video with a different format, this sort of camera facing down format, and really look carefully at the different details of bags, because bags kind of demand this attention to detail when looking at them, to know what is a good bag, what is a not so good bag, what is attractive, what is beautiful. So it's a good format to talk about bags, and so why not try it out? And we'll start with one that is in my personal collection and one that is now on our storefront. And actually, this is going to be sort of an addendum to the most recent drop video, because this bag came in after I had finished filming and editing that last video. So we're going to talk about this one in the context of the drop as well. But let's begin with this Jaff bag. This bag is a lesson in why you should be a little bit careful and have a little more attention to detail before jumping on buying something immediately. Because if you look at this bag, the thing that sticks out to you is probably the thing that stuck out to me, which is right here. Animals. Animals in the border. The field also has this very striking big diamond shape, which I also think is kind of unusual, I guess, as much as it can be, because oftentimes Jaff bags have sort of a rhythm to the field because they're just using these animal head medallions across the entire field. So each one of these is usually a different color, the background is usually a different color, so they're sort of spread around, and sometimes the rhythm is predictable, sometimes it's a little more random, and sometimes it creates an auxiliary shape, which in this case is a larger diamond, which I also thought that was pretty striking as well. So you have the big diamond and the animals. That's what I was paying attention to. But this rug is laced with synthetic dyes. And as a lesson in synthetic dyes, let's turn over the rug. And I may have given away the game already, but let me ask you if you, viewer at home, can tell which of these dyes is synthetic. Remember, what we're looking for in synthetic dyes is the dyes that pop. If a dye sticks out to you more so than the rest of the dyes on the field, it's most likely synthetic. And you can probably tell that it's right here. This red, which is pocking the entire rug, is synthetic. You can take a look at it up close. Do you see how this dye has what we would call an electric quality? And actually, you can see it in other places too. It's here as the offset color of this kind of yellowish color. It's very bright. It's here as the stars in this blue medallion. That is a synthetic red. And at first, I was kind of coping into thinking it was a sulfonic red, which is kind of a whole nother thing that I don't really feel like getting into today. In short, occasionally there can be natural vegetal dyes that just have a different chemical balance to them, makes them stick out more, makes them look electric, but they're not actually, and they are natural in origin. Now, if we look at the front of the rug, this is sort of underscored by the fact that the top half of that red medallion has faded, and on the back, it's still all that bright red. So the question then becomes, do I like the rug? If so, do I like the rug enough to ignore these synthetic elements? And to me, the answer is yes, at least for the time being. I really do like these animals. I do like this secondary motif that is created by the color choice in the field. But the truth is that there's probably a better version of this bag out there that doesn't contain the synthetic reds. So until I find that, I'll probably just enjoy this one for the time being. but that is a Jaff bag with some synthetic colors and maybe just a lesson in what to look for in synthetic colors. All right, let's talk about something that was in our last drop. This is an Afshar bag face. It measures about 1'9" by 2'7". It's in excellent field condition. You can see the field has full, even pile. There's nothing missing, it's all there. There is some minor kilim loss on this end, has been stabilized. And the top also has a bit of loss. You can see the tabs that are usually native to bags are missing. But it's a very picturesque piece. It's also cotton on cotton construction, which means the warps and wefts are both cotton. I have aged this at about 1900, which I think people who are familiar with Afshar bags would look at the construction and sort of raise their eyebrows, because a little trick, I guess, about most Afshar bags is when you see that cotton on cotton construction, it makes at least me think it's later. It makes me think production piece, something that was made specifically for sale. I've dated this one a little bit earlier for one major reason, which is the drawing. I think this is an exquisite example of an Afshar drawing that I don't think is familiar to something of a later vintage or of a younger vintage. I think this is very much in line in the technical ability of something that we would see a little bit earlier, which we can just get into now, because this is an incredibly beautiful bag. And unusual as well. That's important to point out, because in my opinion, I don't know, truthfully, from the limited number of Afshar bags that I've seen, that I've ever seen anything like this. Because Afshar bags typically lean more into that tribal look. There's harsher geometry. It maybe is, you could say, a little more archaic in the drawing. It's nonetheless beautiful and compelling, but you just usually don't see something like this. And the word I would use to describe this is formal. And what I mean by formal is something more reflective of a city design. It almost has this area rug look to it. It has the main border, the two guard borders, it has the central medallion, it has these spandrels, and they're all very familiar. The overall look reminds me of something that you would see from Hiriz. This central medallion with the petals, the floral with the petals, very Hiriz. These spandrels, especially, these flowing cornflower blue spandrels, very much something I feel like I would see on an Ahari Hiriz. Although I will point out that on the Hiriz, the Ahar Hiriz that I've seen, these spandrels, these types of spandrels, they're usually pointing out. So they're usually reversed. But these ones are interesting. They're all pointing inwards towards the central medallion. I don't know if there's some reason for that. It's just something that I noticed. That by itself would be interesting enough, I think, to somebody who's interested in these to really take notice. It crosses that threshold, though, into something attractive for most people because it is very beautiful. And I think I've pinpointed the reason why. It's because many formal rugs and bags, they fall into a simple trap, and that is, while there is much precision in the drawing, often that precision is overshadowed by a stiffness. And I think this bag manages to shake that entirely. Because while this is very formal, while the line work is very precise, it's not rigid. I mean, we can just look at these spandrels again and look how it flows. Look at that line work, the curvature, the curvilinear nature to the outlines of these spandrels. It's incredible work. Look at the florets around the central medallion. Look at that checkerboard pattern that's been utilized on them. Just another example, look at the precision in the border. Look at the line work on that. That is an incredible attention to detail, but without losing the soul, without the stiffness that we might expect, without the rigidity that we might expect from something so formal. And so, while this piece is unusual in the fact that it is Afshar and that it has this formal thing going on, it also manages to just be a really beautiful piece of woven art, which I think is really cool. And I think finding something oftentimes that both rides the line of being unusual and being beautiful is kind of a difficult thing, especially with formal pieces. I'm not usually attracted to formal stuff, but I've found myself enamored with this little bag face. And if you are too, then it's available on our site, but until somebody picks it up, I'm gonna enjoy it quite a bit. Let's talk about something else that is not a bag, but is just the right size to talk about in a show like this. This is a Tibetan takyab. It may have been made in Nepal, but if it was most likely made by Tibetans. And this is a decorative animal head covering. So it would normally be worn on the head of a donkey or a horse. In the Himalayas, it's really quite common to use donkeys or horses to carry loads of materials and supplies. And so sometimes they would decorate their heads with these. I was thinking about what to talk about specifically with this because it is a very cool, interesting, decorative piece, but I'm gonna take this opportunity to talk about Tibetan things in general, and specifically why Tibetan things are so difficult to age. I think if you talk to most people who are into Tibetan weavings, one thing that keeps coming up is how difficult they can be to age. Now it's kind of interesting because when we talk about Persian rugs or Oriental rugs broadly, the biggest clue that we turn to is dyes. When we see synthetic dyes, we usually put the rug or weaving at a certain age. But then that raises the question, how do we know that something is synthetic? And one of the telltale signs that something is synthetic is dye bleed. You can see, especially, you see right there, the foundation of this has red on it. Now, normally when we would see that, we would assume a synthetic dye, which this might be. It might be a synthetic dye, maybe made a little bit more recently, although this is wool-on-wool construction, which makes me think it actually probably was woven for an animal and not a production piece for tourism. But when we see that on other types of rugs, we kind of assume that the color around it is synthetic. Tibetan weavings sometimes are forgiven if they have dyes running. Why is that? There's a very interesting Holly article, a vintage Holly article from the early 90s, I believe, going over a lot of Tibetan things and specifically how to age them. But one note that I think is very interesting is that when we look at Persian rugs and the wool, the dyed wool that was used in making those, where did that wool come from? Where did the dyed wool come from? They had dedicated dyers for wool. So when the rug was being woven, it came directly from somebody who was professionally trained in dyeing wool. And so that person knew how to make, say, a red that came from a vegetal source steadfast, able to stay within the wool and not bleed. Tibetan weavers, at least according to that Holly article, were doing everything. They gathered the wool, they dyed it, they wove it. So you sort of have this jack of all trades going when it comes to certain Tibetan pieces, which means that even if the dye is natural in origin, vegetal in origin, it may still bleed because the person dyeing it might not have had the expertise of somebody who dyed things for a living. And so when we see dye bleed on Tibetan rugs, on Tibetan weavings like this, it may not necessarily be indicative of a synthetic dye. I don't know if these are synthetic or not. I really don't know. I thought something like this was a good opportunity to talk about takyabs. Because you know what? If this thing was used, it's in excellent condition. Because you have to think, what are horses? Horses are like horses and beasts of burden, donkeys. They're like rubbing their heads on everything. They're scratching and biting, and you know, they're rubbing up against rocks and trees. And so to find one that, you know, still has some decent pile, its edges are a little frayed, but they have been sort of stabilized. Not by me. This came like this. But to find one in a condition like this, you know, if it was in fact used, is kind of a special thing. But I've wanted to talk about Tibetan rugs for a while, and specifically that point about dyeing, because I have seen Tibetan rugs that do have a lot of bleed, and I remember reading that Tibetan rugs are very difficult to age, and it's for that reason usually. So this seemed like a good opportunity to talk about something like that. All right, so there we have it. We have 3 different weavings that we talked about on this episode of Bag Boy, or half in the bag or something like that. I don't know what this thing is gonna be called yet. So I plan on doing this again whenever I find some bags or smaller weavings that are of interest to me. And until then, happy hunting.